Can you hear me? I always like to start my mornings with a warm round of applause, so thank you for that. Greetings from Canada. This is my first time in Ireland, so I appreciate the warm welcome. I'm going to talk about our experiences in Canada in the last decade and what we're seeing with respect to trends in drinking and driving. There we go. If you're not familiar with our organization, we're an independent road safety research institute. I am a criminologist. I've been with the organization 25 years, and all of my staff focus on behavioral research. We maintain Canada's national fatality data, which we collect from medical examiners and coroners' offices across the country. So when I talk about our crashes, I'm talking about the testing data that we collect from medical examiners and coroners. And we cover a whole range of road user behaviors. Behavior is probably the most interesting thing on our roads these days. For a little bit of context, Canada's very large country. We have about 900,000 kilometers of road network. We have about 120,000 injuries a year. We have about 9,200 serious injuries, and we have about 1,900 fatalities a year. So that's kind of the big picture for Canada. I'm going to talk a little bit about what's happened in Canada in the last 10 years. We've seen a lot of progress, and in the last 10 years, there have been a number of things that have changed in Canada. So I'm going to talk about some of the findings that we're seeing, some of the interesting things which give us some insight in terms of where we need to be focusing our efforts and the kinds of questions that we need to be asking. Even though impaired driving's been around for a long time, the fact that we've made a lot of progress means that the nature of the problem has changed and we're down to a somewhat different pool of offenders. So I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about some of the latest things that we're finding at a community level with respect to interventions and some of the gaps that exist and some of the places where we're not looking, where we need to be focusing. Sure. Oh, sure. Where do you want me? On the podium? Okay, sorry. Sure. Okay. So Canada made a lot of news in 2018 because we legalized recreational cannabis. That was not the only thing that we did. We actually did a major overhaul of our impaired driving statutes. They created a new statute on transportation conveyances, which covers a whole range of different types of motorized vehicles. What was less known was that it brought in new police powers. They introduced oral fluid testing at roadside, and they also introduced what they call mandatory alcohol screening, which is our Canadian way of saying random breath testing. We had to call it something different. And then it's also important context to know that we do actually have 05 offenses. We often talk about international comparisons and breath alcohol concentration limits, and they talk about North America, including Canada, having an 08. And yes, we do have an 08 criminal offense. We also have 05 administrative offenses, which are a little bit different provinces to provinces, but we've had them since the 70s, and they're through our provincial licensing authority. So that's some of the big picture. Looking at trends with respect to fatalities, we've made some very good progress. We've actually seen road crashes decline almost 60%, alcohol-related crashes. Still 459 people died on our roads in 2021, which is our most recent year that we have medical and coroner examiner data. And it's looking like that's going to go up in 2022. And the overall big picture for our crashes also looks like it's going up. Each year we do an annual poll. We always include the topic of drinking and driving, and we've seen some various fluctuations we asked two questions. One, do you drive within 2 hours of consuming any amount of alcohol? And that's these percentages, so about a little more than 1 in 10 say that they do that. And that's within 2 hours. And we also ask them, do you drive after you feel like when you're over the legal limit, when you feel impaired? And there we see in 2022, we had a high of 10% doing that, which is astounding. And it's since dropped back. And those dips you see in different years really coincide with legislation. We introduced drug legislation in 2008. We talked about lowering the criminal BAC in 2015, 2016, and then when we started talking about legalizing recreational cannabis, that's when we saw that uptick, flew right into the pandemic, and it's only started to come down. To place the issue of impaired driving within the broader road safety context, that top line that you see is alcohol. That's our most pervasive problem. It's about 28% of our fatalities. The line right under it is speeding, also a big issue. The red line on an upward trend, that's distracted driving. We actually have very good distraction data for fatal crashes. And that orange line is drugs. 82% of our fatals are tested for drugs, 50% of them are positive, and about 40% of those are cannabis. So that's quite the issue that we're dealing with. And just to compare alcohol and cannabis, we've seen a big shift in focus and attention on cannabis. Yes, we are seeing those increases, and the question is, what problem is bigger? For us, it's still alcohol. We're not sure how long that's going to continue, but the alcohol involvement in fatal crashes, like I said, is sitting at about 28%. And if you look at our total road crashes in 2023, they've gone up about 1.7%. Our serious injuries have gone up just under 1%, and our total injuries have actually gone down about 3.5%, which means we're doing a better job with safer vehicles and better roads. But in terms of fatalities and serious injuries, we are now starting to lose ground. Okay. One of the things that we are seeing is the issue of young drivers. There has been a lot of focus and attention on prevention strategies, protective strategies for young drivers, things like driver education, things like graduated driver licensing, things like telematics. There's been a huge focus on education for that population, and for a long time we've thought we are making progress. This is the generation that is different. They have got the message. And we're not seeing that in fatalities in the way that you might expect. So young drivers, 16 to 24, represent about 15% of our fatal crashes. 5% of that is 16 to 19. 10% of that is 20 to 24. Yet they're only 11% of the population. In fatals, where we see seatbelt usage is lower than it is for adults, which is surprising, because again, we think that they've got the message about seatbelt use. And this is what's more concerning. In the 16 to 19 range, they're lower than the national average in terms of alcohol involvement. And once they turn 20, that changes. And you see it with most road fatality issues, with most risk factors. You see at age of 20, it changes and they go up. So the question is, have they got the message, or have they learned to moderate their behavior? Either because there are restrictions on them, like zero tolerance for alcohol. Is it because they are now out of the young driver system? Is it because they now have 2 or 3 years of experience and they feel like, I've got this under control, so I can take risks? So I think that's an important issue to be looking at, to understand why, to see if that's persistent across jurisdictions, but also to understand why. Because seeing that huge change at the age of 20 means that we are missing something, and that something is important. Okay, very much the same for drugs. So again, there is something that's shifting, and one of the things that we've heard from our youth advisor, so we have a 21-year-old who works with us to inject young perspectives into research, but also to help us access kind of the thought process and the different rationales for behavior. So she's 21, so her generation missed graduation, missed prom, missed, dating, missed a lot of things that are kind of rites of passage, including perhaps getting your license. And economically, they are facing a different set of struggles. So some of the mentality is, what do I have to lose? And that's very concerning. But again, so just a note to pay attention to young drivers and what's happening in that space, because we're now seeing with some of the other research, we're doing some evidence that that high-risk offender, that what we call the 10%er who take all kinds of risks, we are actually seeing that unfold at a young age in a certain segment of that population. So again, something very important that if we can identify it, that we can learn from and use to really rethink how we're approaching prevention. Okay, I want to talk quickly about the pandemic. There was some sense that the pandemic was one and done. It affected us for a year or two, and then it's passed, lessened. We're seeing that that's not necessarily the case. We polled for 3 straight years, and essentially we looked at all risk factors, and we asked, compared to your behaviors and risk-taking pre-pandemic, what are you doing now? And we actually saw it go up from 2020 to 21 to 2022. And you would think in 2022 we would have seen it come down, but it didn't. And what was most interesting is the impairment piece was much more pronounced than distraction, than speed, than fatigue, than some of the other risk factors. So here's some of the highlights. We had 8.7% who said they'd driven within 2 hours of drinking, more than they did pre-pandemic. And again, much higher than in 2021. We saw 6.6% who said more when they felt impaired, 5.2% more after using drugs, and 9.8% who said they had a party, polysubstance, and done it more than they did pre-pandemic. And those are concerning numbers. So the good news from the pandemic is there was a cohort of people who took fewer risks, and that is kind of the intuitive result. Given the state of the world, we should all have been taking fewer risks. But what was really interesting is the vast majority of people did not change their behavior in terms of risk-taking, which begs the question, what would it take for you to actually moderate your risk-taking? If it's not a pandemic, what exactly is it? More concerning, we did see a notable cohort who just did it more, which defies logic, and it's not clear if they did it previously and are doing it more now, or they didn't do it previously and are now doing it. That's a key question that we need to be asking. And some may say, so what? 6.6% is small, but that's 175 million, or 1.75 million drivers on our roads, and that is not a small problem. We did see that the risk takers, not surprisingly, more likely to be male, younger age cohorts, and had a history of traffic violations, and actually a number of them had also been crash involved, which again also defies logic. But there it is. So the question that we're now asking in Canada, is this the same cohort of risk takers we had previously, or is this a new cohort or part of a new cohort of risk takers who did not take risk previously and now are? Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about where we are in 2024, moving into 2025, and what we're doing about it. We have found since the pandemic, at a community level, a lot has changed. We've talked to enforcement, we've talked to public health, we've talked to local governments, and the perception that things went back to normal is incorrect in Canada. So we formed an Impaired Driving Coalition of Canada to really come up with a national action plan to figure out, we've done a lot with impaired driving, what else do we still need to do, what gaps remain? So we worked with a broad cross-section of partners and really focused on communities. And this past year, what we've done is a series of regional workshops at a community level. We did them in different parts of Canada, in rural and semi-urban areas, and it was really about communities, and we had a whole cross-section of practitioners there. And we asked them, what's happening, and what are the gaps that you need to fill? And this is just some of the work coming out of the coalition that might be of interest. But the community workshops, here are some of the takeaways for us. Whatever infrastructure and support and network existed to tackle impaired driving pre-pandemic has been decimated. We do not see the investment in health. We see a lot of burnout and other health priorities. We do not see the community public health resources. We do not see the support in schools. We do not see the support for advocacy organizations, which are really critical to engagement and awareness. That does not exist, which leaves a lot of communities asking, how are we supposed to tackle this problem? We also see local governments in their rush for safe systems and identifying priorities that impaired driving is not one of them. It's not one of them because it's not showing up in the data, but it's not showing up in the data because the data is either old, it's not collected efficiently at a community level, and the level of enforcement is not there. So you can look at arrests and think that they're down, but the reality is there's not enough enforcement. We're not comparing apples to apples. So the other thing that we're seeing is at a community level in the courts, we're seeing a lot of pleas of impaired down to careless, which again, very concerning. Our courts are saying backlog, pandemic, yada, yada. It's not happening in all jurisdictions, but it certainly is in some of our larger jurisdictions, and that's something that the community is not really aware of, that is happening, and yet that is very detrimental to deterrence, to public perceptions. So what we're working on this year are some strategies to actually support communities and fill some of those gaps to ensure they have either the knowledge, the access to expertise, or the tools that they need to do more. The last thing I want to leave you with is enforcement. And this is a picture from North America and probably to varying degrees internationally. We have seen a dramatic shift in enforcement. The support and investment and commitment to road safety that we saw across policing internationally in the past does not exist. It's simply, police are the last line of defense for every social problem we have. And the reality is traffic safety slips lower and lower down the pole, simply because the leadership is not there, because the staffing is not there, because of the pushback at a community level. Everybody thinks laws are good for other people, but not for us, and that's a battle. So what I want to leave you with is some cautionary notes. the pandemic is over, there's embracing of safe systems, but enforcement does remain integral to road safety, to maintaining that general deterrent effect. We fought hard for it, and we are at a tipping point. And if we do not sustain that effort, it's going to have a ripple effect. And I'll give you a case in point. In the US, with respect to impaired driving, they lost a decade of gains in a single year when it comes to fatalities. Their fatalities went from between 10 and 11,000 to 14,000, over 14,000. And that's because enforcement's been very hard hit. They have other challenges that they're dealing with, but it really speaks to the importance and the fundamental nature of enforcement when it comes to road safety. The risk-taking culture has also shifted, and we need to not slip back into our comfort zone and to pay attention and look closely at the data and the self-reported data to understand what's really happening. And the positive note I will leave you with is this is a very opportune moment to leverage new tools, new technologies to create efficiencies, not just in enforcement, but in road safety across the board. The time is right simply because the risks are out there, they're becoming more pronounced, and there is concern. There is demand for doing something about fatalities, but we can't resource it the same way we did in the past. So we need to find those efficiencies. So that's it. A couple of key points of what we've seen in the last decade, some of the things that we've learned. If any of you have questions about the cannabis piece, I'm happy to answer questions about that on the break. But pay attention to the young drivers, pay attention to the risk-taking that we're seeing because it may not be the same as what we've seen previously, and make sure that we're listening to communities to really meet the moment and give them the support that they need. This is my team. Everybody at TURF participates. So that's my work team. This is my home team that I like to take with me when I travel. And thank you very much for your time.